Welcome everyone. This is a great privilege of mine to start a conversation around learning space and design. And I have with me two of my colleagues from my learning world, and that is Bob Dillon and Rebecca Hare, who have wrote a book called Space, correct? That's the title?
It is.
It's called Space, and I know there's a subtitle, but I forget that right now. So
I got a guidebook for educators.
That's it, and that's perfect because that's what we want to do for the next little few minutes here, is to sort of get people started to think about this idea. So I'll start just by tossing out a few questions, and you guys can answer how you will. So help us understand what is it that made you think this was an important topic to write a book on, and I guess where did you get started with your whole belief in learning around space?
Rebecca, kick off for us.
Oh, you're throwing the ball to me. It's funny because I'm sort of relatively new to the education world. And before that, I've been in design and designing products and designing spaces. And when I went back and got my master's in education, I had a lot of colleagues say, oh, wow, there's a connection here. What do you know about learning spaces? And so I did some workshops and then connected with Bob when he was at Afton because he wanted to change some spaces in his inside in the schools in Afton. That's outside of St. Louis, Missouri. So we worked together changing spaces and working with teachers and students. And it kind of, things that seemed really obvious to me as a designer were mind-blowing and not obvious to teachers. So it was really about changing the way that classrooms support learning. And just recently I was speaking to a first grade teacher, and she's like, it doesn't matter, desks or tables, it changes nothing. And it's just not true. It's not about like an element, it's not about a table. It's really about how you use those things as a tool in your classroom, like you would a curriculum, like you would a device, like you would any other kind of materials.
Yeah, and I think on my end, I think the piece was that I was busy changing mindsets, right? I was trying to get teachers to think differently, take risks, be innovative, try to do some different things. And I was starting to hit this natural barrier around the fact that what surrounded them was still 50 years old and very traditional. And I just started to have these ideas that until we put people in a different environment, we weren't really going to be able to get past a certain point on mindset shift. Mm-hmm. And, Rebecca and I have been able to kind of think through a lot of that, both with the designer's mindset and the leader's mindset. And it's been a fun collaboration.
So the parallels that I'm seeing right off the bat, and you can steer me wrong or tell me I'm on the right track, is in the same way in which we wanted to infuse technology into learning. At some point, the idea was, well, let's just get the devices, give people devices, and then hope that does something magical. And then there was the other side of it that says, well, wait, you can't, you have to think about how to do this intentionally. And I guess I've always been, while the latter seems like the more plausible way that we should think about what we want, what the outcomes are before we just throw technology at it. There was also this, I would see occasionally that simply giving teachers iPads or Chromebooks or devices sometimes, not always, but sometimes was a starting place to get them, like as you were saying, Bob, get them starting to think about a new mindset. So as much as I think the obvious answer is, you want to be planning and thoughtful around how you're designing, is it ever true that sometimes just getting people to think differently, giving them different furniture, does that sort of help kickstart the conversation around a more thoughtful approach to design?
I find that with teachers especially, it's a really easy way to get in and change your mindset, because you're not saying your pedagogy is bad. You're not saying you're teaching what you're doing isn't good. You're saying this space isn't serving you and your students. So teachers are more open. And then you really talk about, like, what is it that we want kids doing? And it's actually funny because I'm planning a really short keynote, and I'm putting on the on the podium in the theater desks, and then I'm putting a more innovative learning space. And if you start saying, okay guys, time to build a project, and you're just sitting there with a bunch of desks, what do? okay, let's brainstorm this. Okay, like let's do research. The students have one choice: to sit in a desk. You can't build, you can't really effectively brainstorm. And so we want to move our teachers and our learning to project-based learning. We want to change the way that classrooms and the learning happens. You can't do that in the traditional environment. It just doesn't support that kind of behavior.
Yeah, and for us, I think we are okay with teachers jumping in and just trying something different. Sometimes you don't have to have it all figured out. And I think, the last thing we want to do, though, is make this about furniture. It really isn't. And it's really not about decorating either. I think that's one of the traps that teachers fall into. And in the absence of good information, we find teachers flocking to Pinterest to find decoration ideas. And really that has nothing to do with learning space design. There's cute ideas there. Families might like it. They might like it for open house. But we're really talking about not being led by inertia and momentum and tradition, but being just really thoughtful and aware about what's going on. And we have just really enjoyed being a part of conversations all around the country with folks that are trying to figure this out. So it's been good.
So Go ahead, Rebecca.
I was going to say, and like about throwing some things in, a lot of times you can start off with adding a few elements into a classroom, and that's going to change. All of a sudden you create new environments for people to work in. You create new environments for students and teachers. And just recently I was in St. Louis in a space that I had worked on with a teacher, and she's like, because we have this table, it's changed the way I can do intervention with kids. We can be on the ground. We're sharing a surface. I'm no longer projecting my information. I'm no longer writing on a wall. We're collaborating together, and our learning is changing together. And this is somebody who's been teaching for 15 years, and just the addition of like a surface that she can work with on a kid and sit on a rug. She's like, it's changed the way we're more connected. We feel like we're co-learners and we're in this together. And that was completely prompted by her. And she's like, this would never have happened in a traditional classroom. And so we didn't plan for that. I didn't say, this is what's going to happen. You're going to have better intervention. Those beautiful things happen because you have great educators who are open and you give them the stuff that they need.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess that's the idea that I was sort of getting at, is that it's in concert with some sort of thoughtful implementation, but at the same time, sometimes you give somebody a tool or a change and you want them to figure out how could this be different, and it might not be something that you or somebody else might readily see, and it's better obviously when they decide, wow, this really changed my practice in this way that I hadn't thought of. But it leads me to my next question, which is the goal of rethinking learning spaces always about rethinking teaching and learning, or is it sometimes done to simply amplify or enhance existing practices? For example, if a teacher is still pretty comfortable or set in, teacher at the front kind of stand and deliver, is there ever a time where rethinking your learning space without changing practice is still a good idea? Or is it always about you got to do, because it's to do things differently?
I don't think so. I think this fits a lot of different folks. And I think that this is about being agile more than anything else. It's about being able to say, today we're going to do this and tomorrow we're going to do that. And we have the things in our room we need to do that. And two of the things we focus on in the book are this idea that kids need space for quiet. So I could still see a place where a teacher's up talking to the class, doing a really great interactive lesson, but a student, because of what happened that morning or what happened at lunch, needs a different place to be the second half of the day. And so they have some flexibility around doing that. And then the second piece of that is we oftentimes are asking teachers, how are you showcasing learning in your classroom? How are you actually putting things up on the walls that aren't distracting, that are actually helping the learning process as it happens? And that can only be value add no matter what your teaching style is. So I think both of those things fit really well.
But on your point, I agree, Bob, but I also think that if you give a teacher an audit first and to have them self-audit, like how much of the time are you doing this? How much of the time are your students doing that? And based on those things, you're going to make decisions on what you need. If your kids are going to be spending a lot of time building something, you're going to need supplies for them to build with. And it's the same thing with elements in a space that allow them to build, allow them to collaborate, and allow them to learn. But a lot of times teachers are like, well, I want my kids doing these things.
Right.
and then they're still spending 45 minutes talking at them. And so if you take it down to like you have 100% of the time, like what percentages are happening, and then so you can actually just say like, no, 100% of the time I'm going to talk at my kids. And that works for some learning environments. And then, then you'd have, you'd make sure all the chairs spaced and people could watch that person speak. But I do think like as a reflective, practitioner, you're conscious of that as a choice. And if that's just a default, then you need to pull back and say like, what is it that I want for my kids?
So, and that's a great response. And I mean, I guess it really speaks to the idea that the conversation around learning spaces is not just for the innovative teachers. It's not just for the project-based learning classrooms. It is a conversation that everyone should have. So with that in mind, where do you guys think, like, give me like the best places to start, whether it's some resources or just some questions or frameworks, like where should a teacher say, I've never thought about learning spaces, I got the classroom I have. Where do you begin this conversation?
Yeah. Rebecca asks a really good question all the time, which is what verbs do you want to be a part of your classroom? And so if you want to be a classroom that cooperates, or you want to be one that innovates, oftentimes teachers haven't even defined what verbs they want to be a part of their classroom. So I think starting there is a nice starting place. Mm-hmm. And then also just taking some time to have some critical friends in your room. We talk a lot about addition by subtraction. Probably 50% of learning space design is probably rearranging a room and removing the things that are distracting from learning. And so I think teachers can definitely start there. Rebecca, any other thoughts there?
Yeah, and you're going to first ask like what needs to happen in this space. And then I think a question that Bob came up with very early on is when will we know that this is successful? What will that look like? And I really believe that when teachers are doing this, and they're a lot of times taking baby steps in this, and it's just about reflection and being open and bringing students in as a part of the process, asking them how they work best, where they would rather be. And like there's, like we want to Starbucks a classroom, but like, is Starbucks the best environment for different kinds of learning? There's not a one size fits all. And that it's really a bespoke process that we want to give the teachers the tools that they need to be the tailor for that space, to know exactly how it needs to be designed. But in the same moment, when class isn't going well, when the energy level is low, to go, okay, we're going to do some questioning over here. We're going to get up. We're going to walk over here. You're using the space to change energy, to change dialogues, to change hierarchies. And you start to become aware of those things. Your learning becomes more dynamic. It's too much having kids just sit and receive information.
And we'll have folks ask very specifically, like, where do you start? And for me, sometimes, certainly we want student voice in there, and certainly we want to feel like a designer. But, a lot of folks are talking about writable spaces, talking about what types of surfaces that are there, and then about flexible seating. So, I mean, those are probably the three conversations that start the most. And like Rebecca said, they're not something you can just scale across the United States or Canada. You have to really think about what's going on in that specific room, because a music room and a social studies room and a math room are probably very different.
Yeah, and we have a lot of spaces that are, kindergartners are in there at one point, and then middle schoolers might be in there later on, or fifth graders, and those are completely ergonomically different beasts that need different height tables. And so there's an ergonomic factor and a human factor to things, but I really think it's about being sensitive to the energy in a room with kids, and being reflective, but like having those kind of core values that my class is about this learning space, this learning experience is this, and being conscious of that. And, and little by little, you can change things. You can bring things in and have that mindset. We had a teacher we were working with, Bob, I don't know if you remember, she was terrified to lose a table. So as a kindergarten teacher, I'm like, it's okay. We're just going to take it away for 1 week. Because she was afraid she couldn't get it back.
Yeah.
And if she needed it. And so I think the thing is that instead of having the mindset, like we're going to redesign a room, this is it. Like we just bought all these books. These are our new books. It's, hey, let's try this out, and to continue to tweak and continue to reflect and be like, oh, that didn't work. And then that was learning. So it's never finished.
So what would be, and you touched on one earlier, Rebecca, but I'm just thinking, do you have some stories to share around success of people that you've worked with or know about or seen in terms of, they went from this to this, and, whether it was like this big monumental, physical space change, or a couple things that just really, made a big difference in the way they taught. So like, what are some examples of really some powerful stories of space and change?
Yeah, the first story that comes to mind for me is we helped a drama teacher who had been there for about 30 years, who had a lot of props. That's the easiest and nicest way to say that. There were a lot.
She was a hoarder.
Yeah, she was a hoarder. We actually helped her move everything out of that space, but like Rebecca said, told her that if you need that stuff back, we can give that to you. But let's start with a much blanker slate. And the kids' reaction to that, which was the most important thing, was this whole new sense of energy about being in the room. She realized that not everybody had to have a place to sit. And it really just did change the entire tone of that room, which wasn't a great room, wasn't huge. It wasn't like she had all of these great elements, but it was a great success story for those kids that were in that drama class.
Yeah, I've seen, it's funny because I had a kindergarten teacher, one of the first teachers I got to work with in Afton. We went in, this is a table teacher as well. She couldn't decide, like, I'm going to get tables. And I looked around, I said, like, I noticed that those students are standing. That student is, it's kind of teetering. Can we give them choices on where they're going to sit and work? And she's like, I've never noticed that those kids stand up and work. But they didn't have a standing height table to work at. So we made 3 different levels. We created 3 different opportunities for kids to sit. And so she discovered that everyone wanted to sit on the floor. And she was also having behavior issues with kids because they were wiggly. And so instead we said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to create these exercise squares where kids will decide it's jumping jacks. They'll draw it out. And you're going to teach them to be reflective, learners, and think, I need to move right now. And I'm going to do a jumping jack. And so there was a place for them, instead of getting in trouble because they were wiggling or they were distracted, they could say, I can't learn right now, and become more metacognitively aware of what's happening to their own brain as they're learning. And they could get up and go over there and exercise. And all of a sudden, those little boys stopped getting in trouble because they were given a tool. So, and that was a space issue. So we put these things on the ground, and she was like, this has changed the way the learning happens in here. And we popped up some tables and we pushed down some tables and threw some cushions in there. There's no expense, but she started to use the space as a tool.
Yeah. And there's so many stories of students hacking the space too, right? Students come into those spaces and all of a sudden they start finding ways. Once you tell them it's okay to kind of own that space and be a co-owner, we saw students stand up a table and use it as a teleprompter, because they needed to write. And so they were videotaping behind a table they had written on with a dry erase marker because it was okay to write on surfaces. Before they didn't have that permission, or that wasn't the norm. So pretty cool when students feel that level of empowerment in the room.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I had a teacher, and this will be my last story, but in Webster, and he was 22 years in the classroom and was going to retire. And they decided to change to a project-based learning model, and they were going to, renovate these spaces. We just bought some furniture. It wasn't a massive renovation, but the changing his entire space invigorated him. And he suddenly was excited again about being in the classroom and was like, my kids are going to do this. And I knew it was successful when I went over, and his daughter came, who was in college. Sorry, I'm picking up the other people over here. His daughter came over, who was in college, and he was like, well, listen, he walked her through the whole room, and this is when my kids are going to do this. And when they choose to do this, they can go over here, and this supports this. And his wife is like, he hasn't been this excited about teaching in about 10 years. Yeah, so, and now it is. So there's that excitement that you're fresh, and he came back to us, and he's not planning on retiring for the next 5 years now because he's so excited.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing as you're just sharing, a little bit, and I mean, my small understanding of the concept, how powerful it is when you use word like ownership and just sort of being intentional about the spaces in some places where we've traditionally never even thought that, I mean, this is just the way it is. Like this is what a classroom is. And so I think it's a powerful conversation. I got 2 more questions for you before I let you go. The first one is, what kind of, and Bob, you mentioned Pinterest as being sort of a potential danger. So what are some other, misnomers or challenging things that sort of can really thwart efforts in making positive changes? Like, what are some pitfalls to be aware of as you head down this road?
Just two quick ones for me. Number one is, as you're thinking about flexible furniture, it doesn't mean pick up every couch off the side of the road and put it in your classroom. We've certainly seen that happen. And then the second pitfall that comes with that is when teachers decide that this thing is good for everybody. So that might be a bouncy ball. And so not having, and even if you bring something new in, doesn't mean everyone wants that or needs that. So those are two big pitfalls we see.
For me, I would say thinking that flexibility means putting everything on casters and wheels. There's a lot of times in which that actually is worse. Having light tables that are not on wheels are just as easy to move. You ever try to stand up and build at something that has wheels on the base that don't lock well? It starts to roll away from you. It's really frustrating. And it's the same thing with desks. I particularly do not like desks on wheels that are just like a better version of the original kind of desk. I don't think that changes the way that kids learn. They're still stuck in something with the surface in front of them. I think that when kids can be the flexible element in the environment, they can go where they need to go. That's really the flexibility and the agility that we're talking about, not just having a bunch of stuff that wheels around. And if you've ever taught a middle school classroom, when they have those wheelie desks, they just follow you around the room with their hand raised. Like, it's not apart from like the Socratic seminar once a week, there's not a really great use for those desks.
It reminds me of talk about the flexible furniture. I remember teaching when I taught first grade, and the first time they thought they had like 29-inch TVs that they put on tube TVs on top of a stand, and you rolled that thing down the hallway, and I'd get 5-year-olds to be pushing this precarious device. Boy, the lawsuits that were impending had something went wrong there. So, anyways. No, those are great. Those are great things to consider. And my last question is, and this is something I'm always, and it's the reason why I'm asking you here, is because I know that you both are very accessible, and for people that want to reach out to you, it's definitely share your book and other resources, but certainly you can also reach out to you individually. Who are some of the people that you both look up to that have taught you a lot about this same concept and idea? Like, who's some people that people should be paying attention to around learning space and design?
You want me to go first?
Yes.
I think that there is, I think when you can learn a lot about, I know it seems passe now and a buzzword, but design thinking, always starting with things with empathy, I think that you can solve just about any problem. And so I think really studying that and having the user in mind and making sure that you're trying to solve the right problem and not just put a desk or a pretty table in a room. And I think that some people who do this really well are there's a great book called Make Space. It's from the D School, I believe. It's from Stanford. That was the book that I thought everyone should buy. And a lot of teachers, it was too much for them. So it's one of the reasons why Bob and I can we scale the idea down and get teachers excited about it. That to me is a great resource. And then I think looking at architecture firms who do the real work and do research. Herman Miller has some great things as far as furniture, but Perkins and Wills is a great architecture firm. They really care about learning. And I think those are the people, but definitely the teacher as well in the space is always the expert on what needs to happen. So as long as that they have the mindset, then they can teach it. Bob?
Yeah, and Rebecca and I had a chance to visit Albemarle County in Virginia, and Pam Moran's doing some wonderful things, who's a superintendent there. And it was really nice just to visit her space to see that she didn't design things that were perfect, but had some really quality ideas where she was tinkering with. And so that was fun. And then, I read The Third Teacher a long time ago, which was Canon Designs, and David Jakes does good work around this too. And so he's very thoughtful in that space. And so both of them have been kind of mentors and guides in both pushing my thinking and not always agreeing with me. So that's always a good thing.
Well, fantastic. Hey, this was a great learning experience for me. And I feel like this is something that I don't tend to think or know a whole lot about. So I'm grateful to have both of you in my learning network. Is there anything else that you wanted to sort of touch on that I didn't ask, or ideas that you wanted to share that you think people should really know about before we wrap her up?
The only thing I would encourage your students that when they do try something, please share it. That couldn't be more important than ever in the work we're doing. And we have so much cognitive redundancy in education where people are doing really good things and then the next person next door tries to reinvent that same thing tomorrow. So if there are good things going on with learning spaces, please share them out. One of my favorite things to do is, just like you, Dean, is share the good stories that are happening around the country and let folks know about them. So that would just be my big thing and encouragement is that even if you don't think it's a great thing, find people to share that with.
Yeah, I think when we were in Afton, there was a teacher who was uncomfortable with something that was going to happen architecturally in the space that we had no control over. And I was like, well, let me talk to, I'll talk to Bob about it. And Bob was like, well, does this affect learning? Like that's a question I think that I've always brought to every project since then. Are you making a decision because it's pretty? Are you making a decision because that for your own comfort as a teacher? Is that what's the easiest thing for you? Or is it because it's going to have a powerful impact on learning? And I think that when you have that as a reflective practice, you're always going to make good decisions.
Well, those are excellent thoughts to close with. And once again, thank you both for taking a few moments today to chat. I found it enlightening, and I hope my students will as well. So with that, I just want to say thanks and appreciate your time.